count up, and I just do a little chitter chatter here just in case I get too eager, and then Cecil doesn't have anything to snip for the actual audio podcast, And it's good. It's exciting. I know you can feel it, Paul. The excitement in the air, like all the stuff yesterday, you could feel. You go back to
didn't yesterday
adrenaline.
Everything that went down? Didn't it feel like old times?
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's the season now because there's drama in the air.
Exactly. We're parsing words. We're trying to figure out people's hidden motivations for things. It's great.
Right.
No hidden motivations here. We're all up on the up and up on the surface on the couch, and we will get started here. Should you be worried about Dalvin Cook? That and more today on the couch. If there's a Minnesota issue, we've got Paul Charchian here. Paul, Adam Schefter says, I'm not drafting Dalvin Cook if he doesn't have a contract going into camp. They did open up some more cap room. Riley Reef said, okay. But they used some cap room to get Yannick Ngakoue. Still, not 100% clear on what's going to happen there with Dalvin Cook's long-term situation. In the short term, if you're drafting in the next week, how should you be handling Dalvin Cook?
I think it's mostly unchanged. I've done a lot of looking into this. And I'll preface what I'm about to say by saying we get plenty of things wrong, and I get plenty of things wrong. But at this time last year, about Dalvin specifically, I was telling your listeners, he's sitting on a big year. This offense is going to be built around him. And I felt really good about it. And I felt plugged into the right people that were giving me the right information. These people are telling me this year that they really believe that Cook's going to play 16 games. Cook apparently wanted to already sign the deals that have been made for him. His agent is effective, almost not letting him, is the way it's being portrayed. That the relationship between Dalvin and the team is still very good and very strong, and he wants to stay. But the agent has been very, very difficult. And for whatever that might mean, now he's practiced in full. He's practiced in pads. He has not missed any time. The belief is that he's going to stay. Now, Dalvin's got very little leverage. Behind him is a very capable backup. Dalvin has, there's a long history of running back holdouts not working out very well right now. There's just not a lot of leverage for him to work with this team, for better or worse. They control his rights for this year, and he doesn't have a lot of places to go with it. So I don't think anything's going to change for his status for this year, and I think he's safe to draft. I'm not going to make a personal guarantee on it, but I think you're safe. I think you're safe drafting Dalvin Cook, and I think he's still a first-round pick.
And I've made this funny circle, Paul, that's like, maybe in fantasy, when we were putting Dalvin Cook automatically as the number 5 overall player, we weren't giving enough pause to his injury history, which probably is giving the Vikings some pause in giving him a number that his agent would agree to. And that's totally believable, by the way. I still wonder how much the agent poisoned the water with Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell is, of course, the reason why we have to say now, I'm not 100% sure, because we always say fade the holdout. And then Le'Veon Bell happened 2 years ago. I was like, well, anything can happen. We have to say to the best of our knowledge. But what's giving the Vikings pause on giving him a new contract, or a new contract at the terms that his agent would want, is what should maybe have been giving us pause of taking him number 5 anyway. So the Vikings may be doing us a favor. But like you said, if he plays 16 games, well, he's worth the top 5 pick. And we'll see. Okay, Justin Jefferson for redraft for 2020.
Yeah.
Put a line through his name.
For redraft for sure, and especially if you're looking for anything before October. I was talking to Kirk Cousins on my radio show at training camp about 10 days ago, maybe less. And I asked him about Jefferson. He tilted the conversation to Olabisi Johnson, who he described as, the direct quote is, maybe the most improved player in camp.
Wow.
And that was unprompted. And then we start digging into Olabisi, and it really looks like Olabisi Johnson's going to start the season. Now, Jefferson can play a lot of slot, and I think he'll get on the field in that role, but you need to draft him thinking you've got an occasional player, a third wide receiver, not a second wide receiver, at least not early in the season. Jefferson's talent arc is not even on the same range as Olabisi Johnson, but I think you can only get hurt here. I don't think there's necessarily a win. And I think, I wouldn't suggest drafting Olabisi Johnson in most normally sized leagues. And I think Jefferson's development now is just, it's just going to be slower than we want, because we know about all the talent that he brings and the incredible production he had in college, and we want him to hit the ground running. But just the reality is Olabisi Johnson knows the offense. He's played well enough to earn the right to start, and he likely will be the starter for the Vikings in 10 days.
Is there some overflow targets, whether be it as an actual outside receiver for Irv Smith, or just because there's not that number 2 target, could he become, not including Dalvin Cook, the number 2 target? Does Irv Smith get a little more appeal here?
Irv Smith does. And what they're going to do, they're going to stand up Irv Smith in the slot a fair amount, and they're delighted with his development in year 2. The problem is they do use a lot of 2 tight ends, but the problem is Kyle Rudolph just won't go away.
Yeah.
And Rudolph's coming off the best season of his career in many regards. So there's still a logjam at that spot, and they can't run enough 2 tight end that I feel like Irv Smith's really very draftable, again, except in deeper leagues. I love 2022. He's going to be a monster, but I just think getting there, it's going to be fits and starts and big production and small production. He's still incredibly young. Last year he was the youngest player in the NFL. So as excited as everybody is about Irv Smith's progression, I think this year is going to be inconsistent, and it's going to be hard to peg those games where he gets 5 targets in a game. And for that reason, I can't recommend drafting him, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I understand that's a bummer. And I still have Irv Smith here and there. I'm as you said, he just turned 22 like last month.
Crazy.
And he might force the issue. I mean, he might do enough to make them say, well, we have to. The other thing that fascinates me about the Vikings from a projection standpoint, Paul, you can weigh in on this. I continue to flirt with the idea in my head that they're going to be closer to 2018 pass attempts than 2019, potentially because of the turnover at cornerback. But that's something else you can give us some insight on. Mike Hughes and company, there have 3 new cornerbacks. And then they get Yannick Ngakoue, and now all of a sudden it's like, well,
maybe it'll be okay.
And there's also Donnell Hunter and his extended absence. So it's not, put money in the bank. The Vikings are going to be one of the top defenses, which keeps those pass volume numbers low. But I'm curious what you are seeing or hearing about the Vikings defense.
So for people that aren't familiar, Vikings in the offseason lost their number 1, number 2, and number 3 cornerbacks. They lost their primary run stuffer in Linval Joseph, who they let go. And then they brought in Michael Pierce, the run stuffer from Baltimore. But then Pierce opted out of the season. So they don't have their usual run stuffing defensive lineman. That's an issue. And they let Everson Griffin go as one of their defensive ends. You mentioned they brought in Ngakoue, and that really does solidify the ends. But teams are going to run at the Vikings a lot, and they'll run right up the middle. But now they've got to start. They've got real cornerback issues. Now their 3rd round pick, Cameron Dantzler, has been a revelation in camp, and the expectation is that he's actually going to end up starting this season, and that may end up being the case for the team. But it's still a really, really raw, untested bunch of cornerbacks. Vikings defense in a season that especially early, Sig, is going to favor teams that have consistency from last year. Yeah. The Vikings defense has, very, very little. And I really am concerned as a Viking fan that the Vikings defense is going to be a shell of what it has been in the past. From a fantasy standpoint, this is not the same level of Vikings defense that you've seen. I don't expect this anywhere near the same number of big plays that we've had in the past. So, I think I've got the Vikings defense ranked roughly number 7. And, this has been a top 2 and 3 style defense the past several years. So there's a lot of concern there. And then, of course, to your point, Sig, all of those things can have real impact on the Vikings offense, where they want to be the team they were last year, where they were predominantly run heavy. But if the defense is going to be a lot more yielding, they may just have to throw with Kirk a lot more often and see what they've got in the receivers that remain on the team with Diggs gone.
It should be a great week 1 matchup. Green Bay.
With the Packers?
Oh.
Well, yeah.
And unfortunately, and you're right, Yannick Ngakoue, Dr. Gene Bramall would say, play the run on the way to the quarterback. That's the kind of defensive end that he is.
Yes,
maybe if you see a running back with the ball in his hands on the way to the quarterback. Exactly. So, yeah, they're going to run at him. They're going to test that. And and Green Bay wants to run anyway. So we'll see, because the flip side of that is if the Vikings defense can't get off of the field, that's not good for plays. That's not good for the number of plays, run or pass. So at least they signed Mike Zimmer to that extension, and all that drama went away before we got to the season, because that was going to be dramatic. Okay, lots of drama.
Yeah, let's see the Vikings, and we can turn our attention to whatever.
Yeah, well, it's good though, because it's the information's choice. Whenever I talk to you on all of it, but especially because you cut right to the chase on the Vikings. Okay, Monday morning we woke up to Leonard Fournette being released. Do you care where he lands from a fantasy perspective?
Oh yeah, I do care where he lands. There, especially if the Chief rumors end up being true. God forbid. Oh, Sig. Shockwaves through the community, right?
Exactly.
I'm one of these guys talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire as pick 2 or 3 overall, and this would put a real dent in that plan for sure. That said, I think the landing spot will be very important. I think Chicago would have been a good spot, but they've already ruled them out, and for reasons I don't fully understand. As a team that could use a hard-nosed, big-body back who can just go get you 2 yards when you need on 3rd and 2, which they don't have on roster. So the landing spot matters, and I think Fournette still has some fantasy value. We're seeing the early returns on his draft position, Sig. He's fallen 6th round, 7th round, 8th round, 9th round right now in drafts that have happened since his release. And I think people aren't imagining the scenario here. He's only going to accept, as a free agent, he's only going to accept a role with a team that can put him to use.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to take a job on a team where he is likely to be sitting on the bench. That doesn't mean he's going to be a starter. I mean, almost all those spots are gone, but I think he'll find himself in a position where he can get reps, then position himself for a nice March where he gets paid again from some other team. And the smartest thing he can do is just find a spot where he can get reps. And I think he'll find his way to that team. And I think he's still got fantasy value. And I know it's a contrarian take because everybody loves to hate on him because, for a variety of reasons. I think where he's going in drafts is a pretty solid value, and people aren't being imaginative about where that landing spot's going to be.
If he doesn't play week 1, I think it's better for his fantasy value. Because he could go somewhere where there's an injury. It sounds like New England is actually the 2 teams. New England, you keep hearing, and I think there was confirmation that there's been contact between New England and Fournette's camp. I guess you said 9th round. I mean, I might not take him in the 9th round. I'm not taking any New England back except for James White in the 9th round or earlier. Anyway, but that makes sense. It makes sense for a lot of reasons. Buffalo was actually a team that was thrown out there, which surprised me.
No. Nothing that throws water on my Zach Moss love.
Exactly, and that's the thing, right?
Last time we were on, my feelings for Zach Moss.
And you were spot on. Let me tell you, and I was throwing cold water on that because I wasn't excited about him as far as his burst, but it sounds like he's been a much more efficient running back than Devin Singletary. And I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's the 9th round and Zach Moss is there and Leonard Fournette free agent is there. You're still taking Moss.
Oh,
yeah,
for sure, absolutely. In fact, I'm taking Moss as early as round 6. I mean, I've got him higher than Devin Singletary.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I just think he's going to be the fantasy point producer out of that backfield, and so I'm really high on him. I roughly running back 20 for me off the board.
I was debating putting him ahead of Singletary, but I didn't feel like I needed to because Singletary's still going to go so far ahead of him that doesn't really say anything in your rankings. But yes, Zach Moss, if we were going to do a countdown of the players that gained the most value in the last month, Zach Moss would easily be in the top 10. And they're going to love him in Buffalo. And he fits well on a team that's going to win 10, 11, 12 games, a team that has a lot of goal line carries up for grabs.
Yes.
All those things. But you said Clyde Edwards-Helaire top 2 or top 3?
Top 3 or 4. I mean, I'm still McCaffrey, Barkley. But really, if you want to make a case for him at 2, you can do it just by virtue of being the Chiefs starting running back and your best offense in the NFL. So I know you liked him in college. Yeah. I liked him in college coming out. We all hoped he'd hit the right landing spot. He hit the perfect landing spot.
Right.
And then it all doubled down when Williams opted out. And it's such a good fit. We've seen so much production from these Andy Reid lead backs over the years. There's no reason to think that he doesn't perform well. And damn it, Sig, I want Chiefs on my team.
Yeah.
I just want Chiefs. It's just your fantasy so much more fun when you've got part of that offense. And I love having those guys and having questions around Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara. It helps simplify that whole range where players could be dropping. So, and by the way, I'm down on Ezekiel Elliott. I think I'm one of the only people that has some trepidation over him. So can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me make my case. And Zeke's been an amazing fantasy workhorse. And nothing I'm going to say is going to take anything away from Ezekiel Elliott. But Tony Pollard's really, really good.
Yeah.
Sig. And I think 82 touches last year. By every Pro Football Focus metric there is, Pollard was better than Zeke. And granted, he did it on a much smaller scale, and that's probably why he graded out higher. But he's way too good to leave on the bench. And then just last week, Mike McCarthy, when asked about Tony Pollard and his usage, says, we can't talk about that right now. I thought that was cryptic insight, if there is such a thing. And I really think that people are assuming that same 80% workload is going to be sitting there for Zeke because it has in the past. We have a new coaching staff. They're not beholden to the old ways. And Tony Pollard, we go back and watch that tape. Tony Pollard's just good, and he just needs to be on the field more. So I think Zeke's going to regress down to 70% or 2/3 share, and that I really think can hit the fantasy value that Zeke brings, and that's why I'm willing to put Clyde Edwards-Helaire ahead of him.
Yeah, and I don't think that's crazy at all. There's some different stuff to sift through here. I may have been making my case for Derrick Henry in the same way you're making the case to crash the top 5.
Yeah.
I think that Derrick Henry probably should have always been in the top 5 and maybe should be number 3. He was number 2 in the second half of the year last year, and it was Christian McCaffrey, big gap. Derrick Henry, big gap, everyone else, including Miles Sanders, including some of those second half darlings from last year. And he should be a little more involved in the passing game. And the other thing is, and when you talk about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and we're talking about Derrick Henry, or if we're going to talk about Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes for that matter, or wanting to own Chiefs, or Ravens or Cowboys for that matter, because Mike McCarthy really did seem to turn over a new leaf, because everything he's been saying is, I'm going to be learning. I'm going to be the one that has to learn how Kellen Moore is doing things. I'm not going to be putting my fingerprints all over everything, which is a good thing in terms of humility, but also the word that keeps coming up in my head when we think about this stuff, Paul, is alignment. What creates fantasy football joy? When there's alignment between schemes and talent and a willingness to just let guys play. And that's what we're seeing in these offenses. So for the Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott, I also thought there was a telltale quote from Elliott himself. It was like, if they want me to share, I'll share. Right?
Yeah, right.
So, and you're right. If Ezekiel Elliott going from an 80% back to a 65, 70% back is significant enough that it would drop him more to that Joe Mixon area of the first round.
Yep.
And Mixon could surpass him. You know what else I want to get part of? I'm calling it the Comet. I want to hook a ride on the Joe Burrow Comet, just in some way, shape, or form. Tyler Boyd, Auden Tate, maybe Joe Mixon at the end of the first round. I don't know. I'm excited about Joe Burrow.
But you can get Joe Burrow.
Oh, and then Joe Burrow himself, yeah.
You just go draft him because
get on the tail of the Comet
anytime you want, right? So why not? If you want to invest in Joe Burrow, that you can, in a little trickier in Dynasty or Empire leagues or whatever. But just go draft him. Where's Burrow going? He's pick 150.
Right, exactly. Like quarterback
right
15, quarterback 17. It's
19,
easy.
Yeah.
The one thing that could save Ezekiel Elliott is a redo. Was it his rookie year? He had like 20 touchdowns on the ground. Is this Cowboys offense? This could be the offense that creates like 60 touchdowns this year or 65 touchdowns this year. So that's the one thing that could save Ezekiel Elliott, even with a reduction in overall targets and carries. But you bring up Tony Pollard, and Tony Pollard's a really tough nut to crack when you're doing rankings, even if you just narrowed it down to number 2 running back rankings, because I don't think we have any doubt that if we're looking at number 2 running backs, unless we're talking about like J.K. Dobbins, or maybe if you include like Jonathan Taylor as number 2 running back. But in terms of pure ability, I don't know if Antonio Gibson is a number 2 running back. You get the point, though. Tony Pollard is at or very near the top of the rankings of just how good is the number 2 running back. But Ezekiel Elliott has been incredibly durable. And just how do you fit Tony Pollard in this offense when you already have the 3 receivers and Blake Jarwin, who I'm excited about too. Yes. So it just gives you hesitation. But at the same time, more often than not, and you've been doing this longer than me, Paul, more often than not, taking a good player and a good offense just works itself out.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
the tricky part, of course, is he's behind a really good player too. But it's you're right. This stuff usually works out, which is a little bit of the conundrum with CeeDee Lamb, who I love. He was my number one receiver for among rookies, and almost I was weeping on draft day when he got so close to the Vikings and didn't quite make it. But he's so good. I just think, ultimately good things will happen and come to him. Let me ask you about Dak Prescott while we're drilling down on Cowboys. Instead of guessing which of these receivers is going to have a good game on a week-to-week basis, maybe it's just a lot easier to just take Dak and just let those receivers go and not have to play that game every week when you're trying to figure out who the cornerback matchup is going to be in this particular one. And is this going to be one of these 8 really good Amari Cooper games, or going to be 8 of these sort of dud Amari Cooper games? What if I just take Dak? But where I struggle is there's Lamar Jackson, who's just an obvious game changer. There's Patrick Mahomes, who's an obvious game changer. Boy, I struggle taking quarterback in like that 4th round where Dak's going. When I'm looking at the rest of the league is still there, and I'm perfectly happy going to war with Matt Ryan and so many, Deshaun Watson and so many other quarterbacks that I can get later. How do you feel about Dak not having to play the wide receiver game, especially applied to ADP, where it's pretty tough to pay that 4th-ish round price that costs?
So I will take Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes in the 2nd round. I have no qualms about that.
Yeah, me too.
And by that same token, Dak Prescott in the 4th round should be fine. What's funny is the players you have to pass on in the 4th round for Dak are almost more of a heartbreak than the players you pass on the 2nd round for Lamar Jackson. Because that's the thing. What makes Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and George Kittle in play in the 2nd round is if you look at the running backs and wide receivers in the 2nd round, unless somebody slips, maybe Nick Chubb slips, maybe you love Austin Eckler, chances are they're going to look similar to you to the 3rd round guys. And maybe some of the 4th round guys. And then you're saving that 4th round pick for, DK Metcalf or for Terry McLaurin or something like that. And that's where you maybe miss if you take Dak Prescott. But I think Prescott should be, and the other thing here is scoring system. So if you have 300-yard bonuses, if you have bonuses, performance bonuses, long touchdown bonuses and things like that, maybe it might favor Mahomes over Lamar Jackson a little bit. But Dak Prescott's profile should be very similar to Mahomes. 5,000 yards, 35 touchdowns probably as a mean or even a floor.
Yeah.
You're right.
They'll each get 3-4 rushing touchdowns probably.
Right.
So a little added bonus.
It is like Prescott is. And I think that Prescott clearly separates himself from the Murray, Watson, Wilson tier that he's part of. I think that he's a clear leader in that tier, and we may find very quickly that he's closer to Mahomes and Jackson than to those other 3. So I think it's a great plan A to say, I'm going to take Dak Prescott in the 4th round and write it in pen, and that's just the best move at quarterback this year. Very well could be. There's a lot of moves. There's a lot of right answers at quarterback every year.
There really are, yes.
And it's funny, too, because now I can pivot to Guillotine leagues, and we can do another piece here because, again, folks, if you had listened to the shows with Paul over the years, I don't know how long ago it was, Paul, like 3 years ago that you first mentioned Guillotine leagues.
Yeah, it was. It was 3. 3 years ago. I think
I always picture where I was. And I think it was 3 years ago. Yeah. And now you are the impresario of Guillotine Leagues, guillotineLeagues.com. And I think that first of all, as we've talked about on the show before, if it's the first time you've heard about it, basically, I don't want to, you should be the one explaining the format. But the great thing is it brings back all the urgency of fantasy football every single week. And I think especially for folks, and you all are starting Guillotine leagues like week 2, week 3, like
into the season as well. Yeah.
So if you're not sure, I understand folks out there, you feel like I don't want to put in all the work for fantasy football prep, and then the season gets paused, or it's just crazy helter skelter with injuries and COVID. But the Guillotine league kind of splits the difference, where you're going to get the fun. The reason I'm bringing this up, Paul, is that I'm up in 2 picks in the Guillotine.
You are. Let's go take a look at this.
And and Dak Prescott, I'm just going to say it, if anyone's listening, that's between Dak Prescott's at the top of my board, and especially going up against the Rams week 1. It's a fun, it's a really fun format. Before I'd launch into like my personal Guillotine league strategy takes, give folks like the pitch, like 30-second, 60-second pitch on the format in case they don't know about it.
I think the format will instantly resonate with people like it did with me when I first heard about it. Somebody just tweeted me this format. You start the season with 17 teams, Sig, and there's no head-to-head. Every week, the low-scoring team for that week gets eliminated from the league, and all their players go to the waiver wire.
Right.
So there's just bidding pandemonium as an entire draft hits the waiver wire every single week. And there's so much strategy because in any given week, here comes a whole draft of free agents. Right. You've got $1,000 fictional dollars to spend over the course of the season, and it's week 2, and here's Austin Eckler. What do? I mean, you put in 800 of my 1,000 to go get Austin Eckler because I could start him the rest of the year, or do you just try to hang on and chill out and wait so you can try to control and monopolize the auction bidding at the midway point of the season and hope you make it that long? And then you do that every week. Last team standing wins, and you get all the money. That's the premise of the Guillotine League. Now, you played in it last year.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on the Guillotine League?
Yeah, well, it's just so exciting. And the other thing I want to mention to folks, by the way, is there's actually, this is brilliant, an insurance option. If you're the first team, like the musical chairs, you're the first one to have to walk off the floor because you didn't get a chair. You can actually get insurance. The GuillotineLeagues.com offers insurance for that. And it's a wonderful thing. I just love the urgency because I think that during the fantasy football regular season, it's a slow burn. That's why season-long fantasy football isn't great for compulsive gamblers, because you don't get any payoff until months later,
Right.
But Guillotine leagues bring the urgency of like the playoffs, where you lose, you're done. So that, as you're watching it's like the horse race, where the cut line is going to be for that final one. You see, I've got one more player left on Monday night, but I need to make up 12 points. But there's someone behind me that has 2 players on Monday night, and they're only 8 points behind me. And how's that going to work out? Because I got the quarterback, but they got the wide receiver. And if he throws a touchdown late, I could actually pass the guy ahead of me, but the guy behind me could pass me, and I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it makes your brain start popping with all the possibilities of who's going to be cut, and then you're already even looking at the players that are going to be available. And like you said,
that's right. Yeah.
There's the I'm going to go right out. Like, what if Saquon Barkley's available that's who my first round pick was. That's why my brain is like Freudian, thinking like I'm going to be the one that's out week 1. What if Michael Thomas is out there? Do you just spend most of your money, or do you try to have the hammer so that late in the season, as better and better teams, better players, because when you're down to 5 or 6 teams at the end of the season, come November,
those teams are superstar rosters.
They're stacked. Yeah.
Which is another thing you never get in regular fantasy. Sig. You never have this superstar roster. And if you're one of the last 5 teams standing, you've got great players at that point. And it's just powerhouse team versus powerhouse team. It's one of the other really unique things about this format. Now, the change of strategy in the Guillotine League, you're playing not to lose.
Right.
You're not playing to win. You're playing to just not be last. And that means you are really coveting safe, dependable players that are going to perform week after week, and not Amari Cooper. With the upside and the downside, you're literally better off with Michael Gallup than on your roster, based on what happened last year, than you were Amari Cooper. So you don't want to have 3 guys have just duds out of your starting lineup in one week, because that's how you end up getting your head chopped off in the Guillotine League.
And players that are injury prone, like Will Fuller.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I want to put Will Fuller in my lineup any week. I don't care if he had 5 touchdowns the week before. You know, because the last thing you want to see is your guy limping off in the first quarter.
Right.
That's what dooms teams in guillotine leagues. The other thing you can't do in guillotine leagues is, what do you have, 5 bench spots?
Yeah.
So you can't have your sleepers that you planted the seeds in the ground and you're waiting for them to start to grow, because those are spots that you can be using to pick up useful players.
Right.
You know, bye weeks wreak havoc. Bye weeks give you very, very difficult decisions with your bench.
Yeah.
And bye weeks matter, right? Because now all of a sudden, if you have 4 week 6 buys, that can create a real crunch and a real problem. So all your optics are different on your bench picks. Your optics are different on your draft strategy. And now I want to do a little bit of strategy for guillotine leagues. And then we won't spend too much more time on this, so we can get back to like all the hot fantasy takes of the moment. But I think that more and more people will be playing guillotine leagues. If I can find the time in a week, which is tough, I want to write about my guillotine league experience this year, so people can just get more used to it. Because it really brings back the adrenaline of fantasy football every single week. Like when the waiver wire runs and you see, even if you didn't put any bids on anybody, just seeing what players went for and who gauging in your head, like, well, he's about a $300 player, he's a $30 player. Oh, no one even bid on him. What do you mean?
And Mondays, Sig, you fall into one of two camps Mondays. You're relatively safe, and now you're watching the teams, and that might get knocked out, so you can see the awesome players that are going to hit the waiver wire, or you're in trouble, and you are on pins and needles all day Sunday, all day Monday, waiting to find out if you're going to be the one that's cut. It's anxiety inducing. Yeah. It's thrilling. It's hard. The heart is.
You'll hate it. Yeah. You'll hate it and you'll love it, like in the same week. So here's my strategy angle. I'm giving away all my strategy for all the other experts that are in this draft with me. So here's what I'm thinking, Paul, because you got 2 flexes and you got PPR scoring.
Yeah.
And I think that you ideally want to be starting 4 good wide receivers, 4 wide receivers that are like 10-point floor wide receivers. And that's where I'm debating, like Dak Prescott, or at this next pick coming up, like, I don't know, T.Y. Hilton or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I drew number 2, so I got Saquon Barkley. And then I'm thinking, well, with 17 teams, that's another whole different permutation here. 17 teams changes the thresholds of what's acceptable at different positions. 17 teams. Running back 2, I know a lot of people were like rushing to get their running back 2. Like running backs were going a lot earlier in this draft than they would in the typical draft.
You bet.
But I'm thinking, I can probably scrape out 10 points from a James White or a Tariq Cohen or a Nyheim Hines. Maybe that's risky. Maybe I won't put my neck out that far, but I love Nyheim Hines this year. My point is this, and in tight end similar, right? So I'm looking at like a week 1 matchup or first few weeks matchups of Blake Jarwin or Chris Herndon or whoever, because you got to punt a couple of positions. You are not going to have a lineup that you love at every position in a 17-team draft.
No.
And then come week 2, week 3, week 4, the waiver wire, now you can reinforce that running back 2. Now you can reinforce that tight end, where if the teams, because I noticed a lot last year in the Guillotine League that I did that you put together, Paul, that flex was a problem for people. A lot of people were having trouble getting consistent points out of their flex. So I'm thinking I'm going to actually draft my flexes before my running back 2 and tight end, and then just hope I can hang on and then
don't mind the waiver wire
and cannibalize other teams. That's right. Yeah. We're cannibalizing. We're this is so dark, but guillotines are dark as it is, and I'm not even going to make any comment about guillotines in 2020 because that's going to be bad. Then we'll turn into a whole different show, which is the show we really want to do. But it's almost like in guillotine leagues, like when you see somebody like fall in the street, like you're ready to like go through their pockets. It's and sometimes you just factor that into your draft strategy. Yes. So if this sounds fun to you, guillotineleagues.com, everybody, and it's got the Paul Charchian stamp of approval on it, and it's fun, and it really will reinvigorate you during the season every single week. Okay, let's just do big picture takes, right? Like you mentioned Zach Moss when you were on the show a few months ago. Who has joined Zach Moss on the All Charch team preseason?
Yeah, and it's funny because without the preseason games, of course, Sig, normally now we are seeing preseason action that gives us all these new data points and new people that we really like and players who we think are going to perform really well that maybe we hadn't thought of before, or we needed to see a little bit more. Well, we don't have that anymore. But now, it's mostly reinforcing some of the things that we already thought and maybe just convincing ourselves a little bit more on some of these players. We also talked about Jonnu Smith, and I can't let any podcast go without mentioning my guy, Jonnu Smith. Talked about him last time. I'm not going to spend time on him here, but Jonnu Smith and Zach Moss are my 1A and my 1B for my favorite sleeper players for this preseason. The others I like at quarterback. Well, first, as a whole team, I'm buying Browns on the year when nobody wants Browns because they all got burned on Browns last year, right? We all know the saying, sell high, buy low, right? And that means you always have. I'm buying when it's not fashionable to buy. I like Baker Mayfield. Last year he was round 6 ADP. This year he's round 12. That's I think an amazing value for a player who gains Kevin Stefanski. He gains Austin Hooper, and he's got a plethora. 2 different excellent pass catching running backs, 2 good wide receivers to throw to, all of the advantages that he's got. I like all of the Browns to take a sizable step forward and be much closer to the offense we thought we were getting last year. And so across the board, all of the Browns I'm high on without exception. And that's really everybody. And so, but if I'm going to put it onto one player, I've rostered Baker Mayfield a lot of different places, so I don't have to sort of guess which receiver might be the better one to have in any given game.
Yeah, I think that against that Kevin Stefanski offense, it should be a high efficiency offense. Yeah. It should be an offense, and this is why I like Odell Beckham around the 3-4 turn. You're going to love the wide receivers available in the 3rd round, right? Amari Cooper or Allen Robinson or Adam Thielen, he's sometimes available in the 4th round. The nice thing about Beckham is he gets those play action deep shots, and if that part of the offense is aligned, and Matt Waldman's been calling it like bumper bowling for Baker Mayfield. Like the offense is going to give him nice cushy guardrails for him to stay in between, which is what he needs. Yeah, and the big part of that offense for fantasy that we care about are the way the running game, which would be magnificent with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and 2 really good tackles. That's not insignificant, Yeah. They get the Alabama starting tackle on one side, and they get Jack Conklin on the other. And Conklin's going to help the running game more than the passing game. So I like that. And Landry may be brought in slowly. Hooper we might be underestimating. He's still not exciting. Like Hooper's not going to change your season, but he could be a pretty cheap tight end 1 that is being somewhat underestimated. You mentioned Baker Mayfield, and I'm fine with that. And look, I want to go back to something you were saying about no preseason and the idea of. I mean, I'm not saying you put it this way, but what popped into my head was confirmation bias, right? Yeah, yes. Confirmation bias. Yeah. And so I suppose this is a good moment to take a step back, Paul, and because the show is on the couch. Yeah, and say that I'm thinking of like football guy staffer Adam Harstad, who's my favorite smartass, and I say that as someone who's called a smartass by so many people, and I know Adam knows exactly what I mean, and I love Adam, I love him, and lots of other people out there. One interesting thing about fantasy football, and again, as the host of On the Couch, I love this, is people are very conversant in psychology and in how our brains work as a buffer between reality or the world and how we perceive it. How there's a layer that, I mean, this is very apropos of our times, right? Of 2020, of politics and everything, that all of us have a layer in between our perceptions as we think we experience them and the world as it is outside of us that is skewing our perceptions before we even get them and file them for our worldview. So people are very conversant in these things, and confirmation bias comes up all the time. And I love like Danny Kelly. Danny Kelly, I'm glad that Danny Kelly's at the fantasy football table now, by the way. Like that speaks well of all of us that Danny Kelly would spend time at the fantasy football table.
I don't know who that is. Who is Danny Kelly?
Oh, geez, he's with the Ringer now. The Ringer, right. I think. And he just does like has a wonderful shtick right now where if like something comes up, he'd be like, I'm ignoring it because I didn't like the player anyway, confirmation bias. I'm retweeting it because I like the player anyway, confirmation bias. Yeah. But this is just how bizarre I'm going to go right now, Paul. Hey, confirmation bias isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you're right, then confirmation bias is going to lead you to the right answers, right?
And right now, we all think we're right.
Exactly.
And we have so few data points this year, Sig. We are all going to be so freaking wrong in week one. Week 1 is going to be a jaw-dropping revelation like no other week 1. And it always is, right? Week 1's always dispel tons of myths. And, we learned so much over the course of week 1. This year, it's all amplified. And it's going to be a disaster. Can I give you my favorite late sleep? Some, maybe even too late to draft in some leagues. And I want to play a game with your commenters.
Okay.
This is Dave and Diego and Matthew and everybody else, the commenters. Chime in when you think you know who the player is that I'm describing. It's going off the board. Sig, average draft position is 366. That is round 31, if you're wondering. He is a wide receiver. He is going off the board at wide receiver 105. He is a starting wide receiver on one of the highest scoring offenses in the league, despite being rated that low, coming off that low. He was a 3rd-round pick. In his second year, this will be his second year. Coming into his second year, 3rd-round pick last year. That's the second year when it clicks for so many receiving prospects, right? Especially high-value receiving prospects, second year. Last year, this player... Bing, bing, bing. We have a winner.
Yeah. DFS Patriot.
DFS Patriot. Congratulations. Last year, he led his team in yards per reception.
Right.
And his quarterback is universally drafted in the top 2 in fantasy football. We are talking about Miles Boykin.
Yeah.
What do you think about the speedster with the size, the spark ability? And last week, offensive coordinator Greg Roman said he sees a giant step. Those are his words. Giant step coming for Boykin this year. And he's going undrafted in virtually every league. He's my favorite dark, deep sleeper. What do you think?
Yeah, you got to love it, right? I mean, it goes back to those offenses that we wanted to be part of, right? Like, it shouldn't shock you if Cedric Wilson is fantasy relevant at some point this year. It shouldn't shock you if Byron Pringle is again fantasy relevant this year, or Darwin Thompson. It shouldn't shock you if Gus Edwards is a really hot fantasy football pickup at some point this year. Players that are totally off the radar, if they're capable, competent, and they're in these offenses, and Miles Boykin is much more than capable or competent. So absolutely. And you just gave me an idea. It's great. The DLF guys do something called Dynasty Game Night. I just did it for the first time. It's like they do like game shows with it's fantastic. And then I did the Fantasy Pro show with Kyle and Mike Tagliere yesterday, and they do something called Odd Man Out, which is really cool, where they start out with like 5 players at a position, and they give you the criteria, and you have to guess which player, and they eliminate them. And the next time around, there's 4 players. And this is sort of like fantasy football. Like, can you guess the player with the least number of clues? Because you're right, you can certainly present a player in a way that makes it seem absurd. It's absurd that someone with that resume would be available outside of drafts. I mean, really, it's probably because Lamar Jackson's not going to throw the ball more than 400 times.
Sure.
But no, especially with Marquise Brown's injury history. And the other name I'll toss out there, of course, is Devin Duvernay, who has also had a wonderful camp. And both of these names are names to have in your back pocket. And with Boykin, you're right. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking at all. And it wouldn't be shocking if it's Duvernay either. I don't know if Duvernay is going to get on the field as much as Boykin in week 1 against Cleveland. And again, like Cleveland, Andrew Sendejo is going to be back there in an important role in coverage. Losing Greg Telpett sucks.
Can I give you my nickname from his time with the Bucs?
Yes,
it's Andrew Wrong Angle Sendejo.
Yeah. And it's easy to take wrong angles on Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin and one Devin Duvernay, and that Mark Andrews, Carl Joseph's going to play a big role there. The linebackers are totally green on that team. Yeah. So Lamar Jackson attacking the middle of the field, Lamar Jackson attacking deep. Denzel Ward will lock down one of his guys. But I think Reed Williams has been banged up. So you're right. Week 2, Miles Boykin absolutely is in the field of the hottest waiver wire pickup. Maybe it's him who scores 2 long touchdowns and not Marquise Brown as he did in week 1 last year. So that's a wonderful take. And I think it ties back into our takes on the offenses. Just know the players all the way down to the practice squad, because remember, practice squad players can be called up on Sunday morning now. And it can also be players of any number of years experience, which is nice.
That is very different.
It maps like the way we're going to be looser with IR slots in fantasy leagues this year because of COVID. Let's talk quickly about anybody that's on your stay away, shy away. Lots of good names for this article at this time of year. Players that just aren't going to be on any of your teams.
Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm really nervous, and I know I'm way out of lockstep with most of the industry on Juju. Everybody's willing to give him a free pass on the lack of production last year. My feeling is, well, okay, but how comes James Washington and Deontay Johnson performed almost exactly as well? At some point, shouldn't you be able, if you're a really good receiver, shouldn't you be able to outperform those young players? And we didn't see it. They put that high draft pick into Chase Claypool, who looks great, and he's going to factor into this offense, and they're going to get him on the field. Juju's heading into his free agent year. I don't know that they make that draft choice if they know they're going to keep Juju.
Right.
And I wonder if internally they don't have hesitation about him, and they wanted to have a backup plan ready if he doesn't perform at a level where they want to pay him into his next year of free agency. And there's just there's 4 receivers to feed in that offense, and I'm just not convinced, based on what I saw last year, that Juju is as good as his average draft position, which is right. I think he's wide receiver 12, 13. Right. I don't see how that gets validated. And I think Ben's going to bounce back and be fine. I don't believe Juju has showed enough last year to suggest he's that much better than Deontay Johnson in round 10 or James Washington in round 16.
Yes. And look, here, I'll make it easy. Here are some wide receivers you should take if you're thinking about taking Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm going in the order I have them ranked right now, Paul.
Okay.
Adam Thielen, Odell Beckham, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. I think that it's not difficult. And what's funny is 2-3 months ago, I would have said I like Juju for some of the same reasons I like Adam Thielen. This idea that if everything is a short, quick ramp up, then quarterbacks, especially veteran quarterbacks, are going to go to the shelter. They're going to go to the guy that they know. And that was why we liked Juju as a potential first-round pick, early second-round pick last year. So we thought, well, if he can get 150-ish targets with Antonio Brown, how many targets is he going to get without Antonio Brown?
Yeah.
But then things change. And I have to say, one of the things I was most wrong about was rookies and rookie contributions, because the rookies have taken camp by storm. So many
have,
And Chase Claypool's one of them. And you look at the Steelers' offense this year, and now you have all of a sudden a wide target tree, because you have Chase Claypool, who is making fast friends with Roethlisberger. You have Juju, who's going to be in the slot, and I still think Juju's going to have some big games because he's the guy when the play breaks down. When Roethlisberger extends the play, that's where those 97-yard touchdowns come. And that's why Juju, in a best ball format, could still really work out for you with some massive weeks. But you have James Washington, who's the best above the rim. And you have Deontay Johnson, who, I mean, how good is he going to be if he was playing last year with a hernia and with those terrible quarterbacks that, as you said, Juju didn't produce with those quarterbacks. We give him a pass. Deontay Johnson says, well, I could do it. I could do it. Hurt.
Yes.
And there's Eric Ebron, who loves him. Ben loves him now. He's one that in camp they're saying Eric Ebron is just roasting everybody. So I think this is a wide target tree now, much like you were talking about with Prescott. Roethlisberger as a quarterback outside of the top 10 you can get. Everything converges at him. He looks good. He's kind of svelte even. And his arm is fine. And they have Matt Canada, an offensive consultant, and I've seen confirmation now that they're doing these exotic things, Paul, like motion before the snap.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. We're entering the 21st century now. The Steelers offense, they're catching up, everybody. And so I'm excited to see the Steelers offense this year. Although from the passing game point of view, it may be like whack-a-mole week to week who's going to have the big week. So I think you're absolutely right on there. Anybody else you want to?
One other guy I want to
go ahead.
I want to talk about Aaron Jones, who a perfect scenario last year where all the carries inside the 5 that are not traditional. Get this, Packers completed 1 pass inside the 5 last year.
Yeah,
1. It's just the regression is coming for him, and it's a crowded backfield. I feel like everything broke right for him. He's a good back. Everything broke right for them. And I can't see the same consistent usage, especially near the stripe, the big touchdown numbers. I think the usage flattens out with A.J. Dillon, who looks to be a meaningful contributor for a lot of reasons, not just talent, but also the intangibles that this front office desperately needs him to be a contributor and quickly to take some of the heat off of that draft pick. And so I'm really worried that he can't possibly do what he did last year, but he's being drafted at almost exactly what he did last year.
Yeah. Yeah. The tough thing about Aaron Jones is he showed he's a really good receiver, but they won't use him unless Devontae Adams is hurt. He is a great running back. If he was willing to take like the Joe Mixon contract, don't use the second round pick on A.J. Dillon. Use it on Denzel Mims, and sign Aaron Jones. Sign him, but they don't want to do that. And it's almost like Matt LaFleur. Go back in the family tree enough, and he's related to Adam Gase, where he's going to do things like volatile, free radical kind of things to mess with our expectations, our assumption of rational coaching when we're projecting these players. So I think that alone is enough reason to back away from Aaron Jones, because now you're inside the head of Matt LaFleur, and you're at the whims of Matt LaFleur. Maybe with the exception of Devontae Adams for that same idea, the veteran quarterback when the bullets are flying. Devontae Adams could get 200 targets this year. Right. However, the thing about Aaron Jones that is, I think, keeping his pulse alive in fantasy leagues is running back 2 has just been a bloodbath over the last month. Everyone's losing value except for Jonathan Taylor and James Conner. And we'll see. But yeah, if it's A.J. Dillon at the goal line, then, you're Aaron Jones. What do you have? I mean, I don't even know what you have, like Devin Singletary, the kind of stock. I'm not sure. So you're right. And Jamal Williams is still there. He's going to play a role in the passing game.
Yep.
So I think you're right to have hesitation. If Aaron Jones was in a different situation, we'd be like full speed ahead.
Yeah. Yep. But, this is not about whether or not he's a good back. That's not the question. It's about how he'll be, what the scheme's going to be, and whether or not that benefits him, and just the probable regression from what happened last year when it was a perfect storm.
Yeah, all the touchdowns. And Green Bay, by the way, is must-see TV for the reality show NFL this year. Green Bay and New England, the soap operas there are really going to be really fun with the quarterbacks. I'm excited. And on that note,
just one last thing. Well, I mean, if only Jordan Love had been good. I'm not saying he can't be good, but right. We're tearing up preseason camp, and oh god, it'd be so great. The only thing that would have been better than Jordan Love looking amazing and putting all kinds of pressure on Rodgers is if he started dating Danica Patrick. I mean, that would have been even better. But
did you see the Olivia Munn little gossip piece?
No, what happened?
Look it up. Well, she talks about a boyfriend that she's not going to say his name.
Unnamed. Okay.
But I don't want to go gossip for the last 10 minutes.
It's her gossip, not yours, but okay.
Right, I know, but I'm spreading the gossip. I'm a gossip. I'm a terrible gossip. I have to watch myself. I'm glad that my mom used to tell me when I was a kid, one day someone's going to pop you in the face, Just and she didn't say that in a way to feel bad for me. She's like, it'll be good for you just to know. But thankfully it hasn't happened yet. But speaking about going back to childhood and memories, I asked Jason Wood this yesterday. And so I'll ask you this, Paul. And excitement. Speaking about excitement and all the things we were excited to see upon the big reveal coming up next week. Go back, if you will, to some of the moments in your childhood where you fell in love with sports, where you knew that team sports, American professional team sports, was going to be a big part of your life, something that captivated you.
Twins victories for me in my childhood,
Was it 87, 91?
Yeah, very good. I don't know why your Twins World Series.
Oh, I was a bigger baseball fan than a football fan as a kid growing up, because I was born in 75. So by the time I was really sports conscious, the first vivid memory I have of football is the Kellen Winslow game, So the Steelers' time had already come and gone, and I loved listening to baseball games on the radio. I loved my baseball card collections. I kept score in my own notebooks at home when I would listen to the radio at night. So I remember loving those Twins teams, and the Twins beating the Braves in 91 was really important. We didn't even know what was coming in 92 as a Pirates fan. I'm a Pirates fan. But those Twins teams were so much fun. I mean, they were full of great personalities. They were really interesting teams for their composition. And the 91 World Series, I know we've had some incredible, the Cardinals Rangers had some incredible twists and turns. And, we've had some series, Yankees, Diamondbacks, that have had some wild twists and turns. But I think that there's at least of the last, of our lifetime, That World Series, the Braves Twins.
Oh, unbelievable.
You couldn't have come up with those twists.
No, absolutely not. As a commenter mentioned, Jack Buck, we'll see you tomorrow night. Kirby Puckett walk-off home run to force us
tingles.
Me too. And game 7, remember, Jack Morris is the Twins pitcher.
Yes.
He pitches a complete game, which goes to extra innings, and they bring out Morris again for the 10th inning. Right. You can't even fathom that now.
Yeah, that's mythical.
It is. It feels mythical. And then it worked. And and Morris was great, and the Twins ended up winning. And it's the last time we had a world championship in Minnesota, 1991. Outside of the Lynx.
Yeah.
Decide whether or not that counts. We've got Lynx victories.
Yeah. Well, it's great, though, because I think what you talk about, and even what I go back to, is the way that, it's why it's so important to experience a championship, even as a fan. And I say this as fantasy football. What's great is fantasy football in smaller doses. I've been saying this all week as I've been talking about it, Paul. It allows you to experience capital G greatness, like be a part of it. Like you love Joe Burr or whatever, Zach Moss or whatever. Like you love this guy, you see it coming, and if you get to ride that wave in your fantasy league, you share in it. You share in the buzz, you share in the enjoyment and excitement. And the same thing happens when you're truly a fan of a team. And look, when you're a fan of a team, you're not passive. You're part of a organism. Yeah. You're a brain cell in this giant brain, and teams absolutely feed off of their fans, and teams absolutely feed off of their communities. So you're really part of it. It's not even some symbolic thing. And it's so sweet when they get to the mountaintop because it's so hard.
It is so hard. Yep. Tell me about it in Minnesota. Let me tell you how hard it is. We've lost 6 straight NFC championship games. I'm totally with you on that. It becomes part of your emotional fiber with, and I think it's a great thing that you're willing to give up your heart and be willing to be hurt by your team, because that is how you experience the highs, by being willing to absorb the gut punches that happen when you go to the NFC Championship and get destroyed by the Eagles. It's as a hypothetical. Not that I'm bitter. It's part of that whole fiber. Now, for some people, and you and I don't get to go to games, but I think it gets reinforced by being a part of the physical community in a stadium. When you're sitting with 60,000 people that have this shared passion and desire for the same outcome, in which the 60,000 people don't have nothing, they have nothing, no other one thing in common but this. Right. And having that shared experience is it should be meaningful to you, and it can feel that way. And I think that's tremendous.
It is. And there's so much there I want to go through. Because in this moment, what our country needs is reminders of things that we do have in common.
Great point.
And team sports have been one of those things. I always reference Hunter Thompson and Richard Nixon being able to just hang out and talk football. But you're right about being at the game. And it reminds me of one of the things that hooked me on fish shows, so to speak, and doing Fish Tour is, there are moments at fish shows. I don't want to go too much into the background of it, but they can play a song because they play whatever they want to play on any given night. And there'll be songs they haven't played for like 5 or 10 or 20 years. And people that have been following the band, like if you're there the night they decide to play that song, it's like the shot that goes in at the buzzer. The jubilation, just being part of a group of 20,000 people or 60,000 people that are jubilant and giving yourself over to this mass wave of emotion. There's nothing else like it. There's absolutely nothing else like it. And it does, in that moment, remove all of the boundaries between us. We're all just part of one giant wave. But I want to touch on before we wind up, and it's always the same thing, Paul. Like every time we do the last 10 minutes, it feels like, well, this should actually launch into like the next 2 hours, and we shouldn't even talk about fantasy football because we can get right to the heart of it. But you nailed it, Paul. You nailed it. Because giving yourself over, even Jets fans, sorry Jets fans, but giving yourself over to a team is faith. It's a sense of faith. Giving your emotions over is a leap of faith. Mm-hmm. And it is signing up for, well, you don't know what you're signing up for. You're signing up for a whole roller coaster of emotions. And it very much maps to the way that in love is a kernel of loss. When you love, you're attaching yourself to the world in a way that will eventually be resolved with loss. Whether it can come in any ways, aging, death, lots of different ways. So you're signing up for pain.
Yeah.
Whenever you love. But what is life without love?
Love, right. Absolutely. And pain for that matter.
Exactly.
And, it's, that's just it's part of the human experience without a doubt. Now, what you're touching on in many ways is sports fandom a religion?
Yes.
And, you talk about faith, and, part of the definition of faith is to believe without fact or reason.
Right.
I believe the Vikings are going to go to the Super Bowl or can go to the Super Bowl, despite the fact they haven't done it since 1977, and they've lost 6 straight NFC championship games. And I know their chance is not very good in reality, but I want to believe, so I do. And in a manner of speaking, it is a bit of a religious commitment.
Well, it's not whether it actually comes true or not that is the point. The point is that it animates your life with meaning and purpose. Yeah. It gives you a sense of belonging. It gives you a sense of community. It gives you a sense of connection to other people. And that's why you do it. Whether it's being a fan of a team or whatever else it is that you give yourself over to, that's why you do it. And absolutely it's religious. And I go a step farther, Paul, and I say that team sports scratch the itch of tribalism. Down to painting our faces, beating on drums, roasting meat, having like
That's a great point.
War. And I mean, come on, in the Vikings, they literally do like the Viking war chant,
They do, yeah.
I mean, it's in our DNA, and like so many things. Here in New Orleans, they have the Mardi Gras Indians, where they took like battles between neighborhoods and turned it into who could be prettier and who could make prettier suits, right? So we can take these urges that at one point in our evolution up the ladder were violent urges, and we can repurpose them in ways that create beauty and still scratch that itch, because it's in us, it's in our DNA. And I think that any of these things make us feel like we're blurring the boundaries between us and the world that we're in, because it's an illusion anyway. So being a fan of a team and giving yourself over to that team, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful act of faith in the same way that other acts of faith in the name of religion can be beautiful. And of course, I live in the city where the team is called the Saints.
Perfect.
So it is perfect, and they hate the Vikings. Not as much as they hate the Falcons. Not as much as they hate.
Really,
the Falcons.
I gotta believe the Vikings have knocked them out of the playoffs in 2 straight years, in which they were,
it's bad
favorites to represent.
Let me tell you, Paul, like a true New Orleanian Saints fan, and that's like most New Orleanians, like they could get hit by a car and like in their dying breath would say 28-3. I mean, it is that deep. And I think it goes back to, speaking of tribalism, like New Orleans and Atlanta are kind of the twin capitals of the South, but so different, so different. And that's, I think, part of that too. Just like I could get into like Texas and Texas A&M and that rivalry, it can be cultural, not just about the teams and the history and things like that. Texas, the name of Texas mascot Bevo was based on changing 13-0 that they branded on him when Texas A&M beat Texas 13-0 to Bevo, because they needed to do something to be able to keep the Longhorn. And then Texas A&M mentions Texas in their fight song, so it's like two brothers, like Cain and Abel or something, But like I said, this is when it gets good, Paul. But also it gets good whenever you check everything out that Paul's doing. Follow him, Guillotine Leagues, dip your toe in the water. You'll thank us. And fantasy football, come back. The water's fine. We'll be here. Yeah. We're all still here. We're all still excited. And again, we're here to help you win, things like that. But mainly we're just here to keep each other company and have a good time, and maybe for a little bit forget what's going on, because that's what fantasy football has always been for anyway, folks. And you've always been there for us. We're here for you. Thank you, everybody, for sharing the excitement. Tonight, if you're listening on Wednesday, tonight, the Football Guys staff OG draft we're going to do live on the air. So that'll be fun. Thank you, everybody, as always, and very much. Stay very classy.